Welcome to Kubernetes Forum in Sydney. I actually was program chair for this particular event, so if you enjoy the talks that you see today, please go and tell the speakers that you enjoyed them, and if it's anything you didn't enjoy, come and tell me. Okay. So I work with a company called Aqua Security, and security in Cloud Native is kind of my thing, so I want to talk this morning about security and a kind of military strategy technique called the OODA Loop. So has anybody here heard of the OODA Loop before? It's pretty hard to see you, but a few hands. Okay. It was invented by a US officer called John Boyd, and the idea is that in a conflict situation, you observe your current situation, you orientate yourself, which is basically looking at what you expected to be happening, what your enemy's doing. Then you decide what you're going to do, you act on that decision, and then you keep going around this circle, re-evaluating where you are, observing where you are again, orientating, and moving on around the loop. And if that sounds familiar in Kubernetes, it's because we use this in reconciliation. So a controller will observe the current state, compare that to expectations, what's been defined in YAML, decide whether any resources needed to be added or taken away, and create and destroy those resources to constantly bring the current state in line with expectations. If we're talking about a deployment, we might say, how many pods are there? Does the number of pods match the replica count? And if it doesn't, if there are too many or too few, we're going to have to create and destroy some pods. So let's take a look at that happening. If my video starts, yes, there we go. So I have a very simple deployment here with 3 Nginx pods. The replica count is 3. And you can see that those 3 pods are running in the bottom half of the screen. If I delete one of those pods, so just delete that, and you see very quickly, not only does that container get destroyed, but a new one gets recreated. So that's the controller doing its reconciliation loop and bringing the number of pods back to the replica count we expected. So that's how reconciliation works in Kubernetes. And we can also use OODA loops for security purposes. We could detect behavior, compare it to what we expected to see, decide whether that's something we want to allow, and do something about it. Have some kind of emergency action when we see something unexpected. What do I mean by something unexpected? We have to detect anomalies. Containers are actually really good for detecting anomalies because each container is only doing a pretty small function. It's very often there's only one executable inside a given container. So executables are one thing we can observe and see whether it matches our expectations. So I have a little script here using a tool called Tracy, and that's going to tell us about new executables that start in containers. I have my Nginx deployment with my 3 running pods. If I delete one of those, the reconciliation loop's going to kick in, create a new Nginx pod, and we see 2 executables. One is the pause container, it's a detail, and what we are interested in is an Nginx program running inside the Nginx pod. That's exactly what we expect. Okay, hands up if you have ever downloaded YAML and run it from the internet. Yeah, we all do it, right? And you've got to be pretty careful because if you don't pay attention to the details of your potentially hundreds of lines of YAML that you download, maybe something bad is being snuck in. So let's say that I inadvertently download some bad Nginx deployment, and I run it in my deployment, and we'll observe what happens in terms of the executables. And this time, we don't see Nginx running. We see some other things, including a shell script called bad. That seems kind of dubious. Probably didn't want that to happen. We can look at the pods that are running and check the logs. We'll look at the logs for one of these bad ones that's been created. Now, I wrote this demo, so I know that all it's doing is logging something out, logging out a message. But imagine it could be cryptocurrency mining or exfiltrating your data. All sorts of bad things can happen if you download YAML from the internet. But I can detect that, right? I've seen the executables running inside my pod. So I can use the OODA loop. I can monitor the new executables, take a look at the executable names, decide whether, well, in this example, I'm just going to be checking, is it bad? And if it's bad, I'm going to kill the pods. So this time, I'm running a very simple awk script that's going to match the executable name against the word bad. And if it's bad, it's going to run a shell script called kill. My kill script is very simple. It just looks at the pods and then deletes all of them. Just sort of emergency ripcord. OK, so I've created my bad Nginx deployment. And we could see in the top part of the screen that my script kicked in and all the pods got deleted pretty quickly. But if we look at the logs, we can see the message got logged out. So those 3 pods were able to write, or they were able to do what they wanted to do before they got killed. And if I've paused the video, and now if I carry it on, what you'll see is the reconciliation loop kicking in, recreating all those pods, and then they're doing the bad thing, so the kill script is getting implemented, and they're getting destroyed again. And you can see in the middle of the screen, errors while you can't collect logs while the container's being deleted and recreated, but there's also enough time for some of those pods to do their thing, to send out that error message. So the problem we can see there is that it takes time to react between that observe step and the action of deleting the pod. And if that time is long enough, an attacker could potentially use it for their bad purposes. There's no real definition of what is too long. What does too slow mean? Well, John Boyd, who was the originator of the OODA Loop, said that you have to, if you want to win, you have to operate at a faster tempo than our adversaries. In the world of security, we're talking about attackers. But there is no time limit. There is no fast enough. It would be better. Oh, the other thing is what I was mentioning about the problem with this approach, where my security tool, my very naive security tool, is at odds with that Kubernetes reconciliation loop. It's just a waste of resources to keep creating these pods and then deleting them again and creating them again and deleting them again. We need something much more sophisticated if we're going to just kill pods. What would be a lot better is if we were able to prevent those bad Nginx pods from being deployed in the first place. If we knew that the intention was to run something bad, then we wouldn't have to stop it afterwards. So a better OODA loop looks at the intention, compares the intention with the expectation, and then decides whether or not to allow or prevent that behavior. Now, at runtime, there are tools that can do that, but it's pretty hard. What we can do is look earlier in the deployment pipeline for places where we can insert preventative measures. So if we can prevent bad pods, bad software from being deployed, it just cannot do us any harm. If we can detect when our software has known vulnerabilities, it can't do us any harm if we don't deploy that software. So anything we can do before runtime is preventative and basically more effective. Scanning images is looking inside those images for known vulnerabilities. Depending on your scanner, you may also be able to detect malware. You might be able to detect that cryptocurrency mining. And it prevents those images from being deployed, from being stored in your registry, perhaps. We can use role-based access control to stop unauthorized users from deploying software. And we can use admission control, things like Open Policy Agent, to check the YAML as it's being deployed and prevent it if it doesn't meet our criteria. Essentially, if it says it's going to run a bad Nginx container, I don't want it to run. If you were thinking about securing your home or your office, which would you do first? Would you put a lock on first, or would you invest in web surveillance? I think you'd probably put a lock on the door first, right? That's the easier and most effective thing to do. And that's access control. That's a preventative measure. It's a good thing to have multiple layers of defense, so you might want to add the video surveillance on top, but you would always prioritize access control over observations. So when it comes to security, the most effective things that you can do are preventative measures. And if you can also add observability, that's also useful, but prioritize your access control. Prevention is better than cure. Thank you very much.